What this frozen German shepherd did left an entire small town in shock, and everyone was stunned when they discovered why. A nearly frozen dog wandered out of a blizzard and desperately approached a stranger's truck at a remote gas station, refusing to leave despite the dangerous conditions. The situation grew increasingly dire until the stranger made a shocking discovery that left everyone in the community speechless. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The winter of 2023 had been unusually harsh for the small town of Pinewood Ridge. Nestled between towering mountains in northern Montana, the community of just over 3,000 people was accustomed to severe weather, but this December had tested even the most weather-hardened residents. 3 consecutive blizzards had buried the town under nearly 6 feet of snow, with temperatures plunging to -30 degrees on multiple nights. Local meteorologist Carl Winters had taken to calling it the winter that wouldn't quit during his increasingly grim forecasts. For Michael Donovan, the brutal conditions were just another challenge to overcome. At 42, the former Marine Corps sergeant had faced worse during his 3 tours in Afghanistan. The perpetual limp from an IED explosion that had ended his military career served as a daily reminder of greater hardships endured. His salt and pepper beard and the deep lines around his steel-grey eyes spoke of decades navigating life's harshest environments, both on battlefields abroad and in the personal struggles that had followed his return home. On this particular morning, Michael was making his weekly supply run into town, a necessary journey he'd postponed twice already due to impassable roads. His isolated cabin, 15 miles outside of Pinewood Ridge, offered the solitude he'd sought after his medical discharge 8 years ago. Most days, the distance from town was exactly what he needed: space to manage his PTSD symptoms without explanation or apology. Today, however, the remoteness had become a liability as his food supplies dwindled to concerning levels. The drive into town normally took 25 minutes. Today, it had already consumed an hour, with Michael carefully navigating his modified Ford F-250 through snowdrifts that occasionally reached the hood of his vehicle. The truck, like its owner, bore the marks of adaptability to harsh conditions: specialized snow tires, reinforced suspension, and a custom winch system that had saved him from being stranded more times than he cared to remember. "Just get there, get supplies, get home," Michael muttered to himself, a ritual of focus he'd developed during his recovery. Simple objectives, clearly stated, helped keep the anxiety at bay when the world became too chaotic. The technique had been suggested by Dr. Sarah Chen, the VA psychologist who had worked with him during his darkest months after returning home. While he'd stopped regular therapy years ago, certain coping mechanisms had become permanent fixtures in his life. The snow was falling again as Michael approached Miller's Gas and Supply, the last outpost before reaching Pinewood Ridge proper. Located at a crucial junction where the mountain road met the county highway, the combination gas station and general store served as a lifeline for the more isolated residents in the surrounding hills. Today, Michael's fuel gauge was hovering uncomfortably close to empty, making this stop non-negotiable despite his preference to complete errands with minimal human interaction. The parking lot was deserted except for a single plow truck. Not surprising given the weather and the early hour. Michael pulled up to the pump, the truck's headlights briefly illuminating swirling snow that seemed to grow thicker by the minute. The local radio station crackled through his speakers with an updated weather alert. Blizzard conditions expected to worsen throughout the day, all non-essential travel discouraged, possible road closures by afternoon. Michael increased his mental timeline: get fuel, get supplies, get home before the worst hit. As he opened his door, the biting cold struck with physical force. Even through his specialized winter gear, a heavy insulated jacket, thermal pants, and military-grade boots, the temperature cut to the bone. Working quickly, Michael activated the pump and began refueling, his breath forming thick clouds in the frigid air. The wind had picked up, driving ice crystals that stung any exposed skin with needle-like precision. It was then that Michael noticed something moving at the edge of the station's property, where the asphalt met the beginnings of the dense pine forest. At first, he assumed it was just snow being whipped into unusual patterns by the gusting wind. But the movement was too deliberate, too directed. Narrowing his eyes against the swirling white, Michael made out a shape struggling through a snowdrift, something large but low to the ground, moving with desperate determination. A moment later, the shape resolved into a dog, a German shepherd, its normally proud stature diminished by obvious distress. The animal was moving with painful slowness, each step an obvious struggle. Even from a distance, Michael could see ice formed around the dog's face and paws, its fur matted with frozen snow. Michael remained still, assessing the situation with the calculated awareness that had kept him alive in combat zones. Stray dogs weren't uncommon in these rural areas, but they typically avoided human contact. This one was moving directly toward him with clear purpose. "Hey there!" Michael called cautiously, his voice nearly lost in the howling wind. The German shepherd paused momentarily, then continued its approach with renewed urgency. As it drew closer, Michael could see the animal was in severe distress. Its powerful frame had been reduced by what appeared to be days without food, and patches of ice clung to its thick coat. Most concerning were its paws, which left faint blood traces in the pristine snow, the pads likely cracked and bleeding from prolonged exposure to the extreme cold. Yet despite its obvious suffering, the dog's eyes remained alert and focused. There was an intelligence in that gaze that gave Michael pause. This wasn't a feral animal or a lost pet driven by simple desperation. Something else was happening here. When the dog reached the edge of the gas station's overhang, it stopped about 10 feet from Michael. For a moment, they simply regarded each other, the former Marine and the battered German shepherd, two survivors assessing one another amidst the swirling snow. Then, with deliberate movement, the dog took 3 more steps forward and sat down, its eyes never leaving Michael's face. "What's your story?" Michael asked quietly, completing the fueling process while maintaining visual contact with the animal. The dog's ears perked slightly at the sound of his voice, but otherwise remained perfectly still, despite the obvious pain it must have been experiencing. Years of training had taught Michael to trust his instincts, and something about this dog triggered his attention in ways he couldn't immediately articulate. The animal wasn't acting like a stray, seeking random assistance. Its behavior suggested purpose, a specific intent that seemed incongruous with a chance encounter during a blizzard. Carefully, Michael reached into his truck and retrieved half a protein bar from the center console. He unwrapped it slowly, making his movements deliberate and non-threatening, then tossed it gently toward the dog. The German shepherd sniffed the offering, but made no move to eat it. Instead, it rose to its feet and took several steps toward the road, leading away from the gas station, then turned back to look at Michael. The behavior was so unexpected that Michael found himself momentarily confused. The dog repeated the movement, walking several more steps toward the road, then looking back with unmistakable intent. "You want me to follow you?" Michael said incredulously, the words forming clouds in the frigid air. In this weather, the dog returned to its position near Michael and again sat down, its posture conveying a patience at odds with its physical condition. Up close, Michael could see the animal was wearing what appeared to be a weathered tactical collar, the kind used by working dogs in specialized services. This wasn't someone's pet that had wandered away from home. This was a trained service animal. Michael's military experience included work with K-9 units. and he recognized the disciplined behavior of a dog with a mission. Something was very wrong, and this animal had deliberately sought human assistance. "Hold on," Michael said, making a quick decision. He secured the gas pump, then moved toward the station's small convenience store, looking back to see if the dog would follow. It did, limping slightly but maintaining determined focus. Inside, the store was warm but deserted, except for Ray Miller, the station's 60-something owner who had been operating this outpost for over 30 years. Ray looked up from his crossword puzzle, his bushy eyebrows rising at the sight of Michael stamping snow from his boots. "Didn't expect to see anyone foolish enough to be out in this mess," Ray commented by way of greeting. "Must be important to risk these roads." "Supply run," Michael replied simply, then gestured toward the door. "There's a dog outside, German Shepherd. Looks like a service animal, but it's in bad shape, frozen nearly solid." Ray set down his pencil with a frown. "Collar? Tags?" "Tactical collar, but I didn't see any identification. It's acting strange, like it wants me to follow it somewhere." The older man's expression shifted from mild concern to sharp interest. "Follow it where?" "Back down the east road, looks like. Not toward town." Ray moved surprisingly quickly for his age, coming around the counter and pulling a heavy coat from a hook near the door. "That means something's wrong. Those dogs don't just approach strangers unless they're trained to seek help." As the two men stepped outside, they found the German Shepherd waiting patiently despite the worsening conditions. The snow was now falling so heavily that visibility had decreased to less than 50 yards, and the wind cut through even the heaviest clothing with icy precision. "That's a search and rescue dog," Ray said immediately, studying the animal with knowing eyes. "See the markings on that collar? Special ops training. Used to see them when I was volunteering with mountain rescue years back." The dog rose immediately upon seeing them, again moving several steps toward the eastern road before looking back with clear expectation. Ray turned to Michael, his weathered face grave. "Someone's in trouble out there. These dogs are trained to find help when their handlers are incapacitated." The implication was clear and immediate. Somewhere in the blizzard, someone was stranded, injured, or worse. The dog had traveled through punishing conditions to find assistance, and every minute mattered. Michael felt a familiar tension settle across his shoulders, the heightened awareness that preceded difficult decisions in uncertain conditions. He'd made countless such choices in combat zones, weighing risks against potential outcomes, with lives hanging in the balance. This situation carried similar weight, but with the additional complications of severe weather and unknown terrain. "Oh, how far do you think it traveled?" Michael asked, already mentally cataloguing the emergency supplies in his truck. Ray shook his head. "No way to know. These dogs can cover incredible distances when necessary, but in these conditions, with the state it's in—" He gestured to the bloody paw prints now barely visible in the rapidly accumulating snow. "Can't have been too far, or it wouldn't have made it at all." Michael made his decision quickly. "I'm going to follow it. My truck can handle these conditions. Better than most." Ray nodded, already turning back toward the store. "I'll call the sheriff's office, but don't wait for them. Reception's spotty with this storm, and their response time will be slow with the main roads in such bad shape. I've got some supplies you should take." Within minutes, Ray had assembled an emergency kit, thermal blankets, first aid supplies, chemical heat packs, and extra water. "Been through enough winters here to know what might be needed," he explained, loading the items into a waterproof bag. "Got some dog supplies too. My wife's sister raises shepherds." As Michael secured the supplies in his truck, Ray emerged with a small package of jerky, which he offered to the waiting dog. This time, the German Shepherd accepted the food, consuming it quickly but neatly, further evidence of its training. "It's trusting us now," Ray observed, "knows we understand what it's trying to communicate." Michael nodded, recognizing the shift in the animal's demeanor. With food in its system and the promise of help secured, the dog's rigid vigilance had relaxed slightly, though its attention remained firmly focused on the road ahead. "I'll check in when I can," Michael told Ray, climbing into his truck and starting the engine. "If you get through to the sheriff, tell them I'm heading east from your location, following the dog's lead." Ray's expression was solemn. "Be careful out there. This storm's only getting worse, and there's not much between here and the old logging roads except trouble in weather like this." Michael opened the passenger door, and without hesitation, the German Shepherd jumped in, its movements stiff from cold and exhaustion, but determined nonetheless. The dog settled into the seat, its attention immediately fixed on the road ahead, as if mapping a mental route. As Michael pulled away from Miller's gas and supply, the full force of the storm became apparent. The windshield wipers struggled against the heavy snow, and visibility extended barely beyond the reach of his headlights. Under normal circumstances, attempting to drive in these conditions would be reckless. But military experience had taught Michael that sometimes the greater risk lay in inaction, particularly when lives hung in the balance. The German Shepherd sat alert beside him, occasionally making small noises of direction when they approached intersections. Despite its exhausted state, the dog maintained focused awareness, confirming Michael's assessment of its specialized training. "Where are we going, boy?" Michael asked, knowing no answer would come, but finding comfort in breaking the tense silence. The dog turned briefly at his voice, intelligent eyes meeting his for a moment, before returning to the road. In that brief exchange, Michael felt an unexpected connection, a shared purpose that transcended species. Both of them understood mission focus, both knew what it meant to continue despite physical suffering, and both recognized the responsibility that came with specialized training. As they traveled deeper into the storm, leaving behind the relative safety of main roads, Michael found himself wondering about the dog's handler and what circumstances had led to this desperate mission for help. Search and rescue personnel were highly trained, well-equipped, and acutely aware of weather risks. For one to become stranded in conditions severe enough to warrant sending their canine partner for help suggested a situation gone catastrophically wrong. The eastern road narrowed as they proceeded, the ploughed section growing slimmer until eventually disappearing altogether. Michael shifted his truck into four-wheel drive, feeling the vehicle labor against increasing snow depth. They had traveled approximately 3 miles from the gas station, moving away from established properties into the more remote forest areas that stretched between small homesteads and abandoned logging operations. Suddenly, the German Shepherd became more alert, sitting up straighter and making a small whining sound. Michael slowed the vehicle, peering through the nearly impenetrable curtain of white. At first, he saw nothing but swirling snow and the dark silhouettes of pine trees. Then, as they rounded a slight bend in the road, his headlights illuminated something unexpected. A vehicle far smaller and less equipped for these conditions than his own, partially buried in a snowdrift where it had apparently slid off the road. The German Shepherd's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. It pawed at the passenger window, whining with increased urgency. Michael didn't hesitate, bringing his truck to a careful stop at a safe distance from the stranded vehicle. "Is that where we're going?" he asked, though the answer was already clear from the dog's behavior. As Michael prepared to exit his truck, he assessed the situation with practiced efficiency. The stranded vehicle was a small SUV, unsuited for these extreme conditions. It had clearly been there for some time, as snow had accumulated significantly around and over it. There were no visible lights or signs of movement, raising immediate concerns about the condition of anyone who might be inside. The German Shepherd was now scratching at the door with renewed energy, its earlier exhaustion seemingly forgotten. In the urgency of reaching its destination, Michael gathered his emergency gear and opened the door, immediately bracing against the assault of wind and snow that felt even more vicious than before. "Let's go," he said to the dog, which immediately jumped down and began forging a path toward the stranded vehicle, its purpose now clear and its mission nearly complete. What Michael would find in that snow-covered SUV would shock the entire community of Pinewood Ridge and reveal an extraordinary story of courage, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bond between a handler and their canine partner, a discovery that would save multiple lives and change Michael's own isolated existence in ways he could never have anticipated. As Michael trudged through knee-deep snow toward the stranded vehicle, the German Shepherd moved with renewed purpose, breaking trail despite its injured paws. The blizzard's intensity had increased, even in the few minutes since they'd left the gas station, reducing visibility to mere feet and transforming the short distance to the SUV into a challenging journey. Drawing closer, Michael could now make out more details of the vehicle, a Toyota RAV4, dark blue, with Colorado license plates. The SUV had slid sideways off the road, its front end partially buried in a snowdrift, while the rear remained partially visible. Snow had accumulated on all surfaces, suggesting it had been stranded for at least several hours, possibly longer. The dog reached the driver's side door first, pawing at it with desperate intensity and releasing short, sharp barks that conveyed unmistakable urgency. Michael followed, sweeping away snow from the window with his gloved hand. The interior was dark, making it impossible to see clearly inside. "Hello? Anyone in there?" Michael called, knocking firmly on the window. No response came from within. The vehicle, the German Shepherd, continued its frantic pawing, now moving toward the rear passenger door with determined focus. Michael followed, noting that this door had slightly less snow accumulated against it. He tried the handle and found it unlocked, a stroke of luck in the otherwise dire situation. As the door swung open, the dog immediately attempted to jump. Inside, though its weakened condition made the effort difficult, Michael helped lift the animal into the vehicle, then used his flashlight to illuminate the SUV's interior. What he saw caused his breath to catch. A woman lay across the back seat, unconscious or asleep, covered with what appeared to be every available piece of clothing and fabric from the vehicle. Her face was pale, with a concerning bluish tint to her lips, and her breathing appeared shallow. Next to her on the floor was a medical pack with official wilderness search and rescue markings, identical to the insignia on the German Shepherd's tactical collar. But what truly stunned Michael was the presence of a second person, a small child, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, bundled securely against the woman's chest beneath the layers of improvised insulation. The child's face was considerably healthier in color than the woman's, suggesting she had sacrificed her own warmth to protect the younger victim. The German Shepherd moved immediately to the woman's side, nuzzling her face with gentle insistence. The dog's entire demeanor had transformed from urgent messenger to protective guardian, its body language communicating both relief at having successfully brought help and concern for its handler's condition. Michael's military training kicked in automatically, years of emergency response experience guiding his actions. He checked the woman's pulse, present but weak and irregular. Her skin felt dangerously cold to the touch. The child, when Michael carefully examined him without separating him from his protective cocoon, appeared to be in better condition, unconscious but with stronger vital signs and warmer body temperature. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Michael asked loudly, gently shaking the woman's shoulder while assessing her for obvious injuries. There was no response, confirming his suspicion that she was suffering from advanced hypothermia. Working quickly, Michael retrieved the emergency supplies from his pack. He activated several chemical heat packs, placing them strategically near the core areas of both victims, but not directly against their skin, knowing that too rapid rewarming could cause additional complications. The vehicle's interior was nearly as cold as the outside air, suggesting its heating system had failed or run out of fuel hours ago. Time was critical. Neither victim could survive much longer in these conditions, and the worsening storm made conventional rescue operations increasingly unlikely. Michael made a swift decision based on his assessment. "We need to get you both to my truck," he said aloud, though neither human victim could hear him. The dog watched attentively, as if understanding the plan and its importance. Moving hypothermia victims required careful handling to prevent further heat loss and to avoid triggering a potentially fatal condition called rescue collapse. Michael wrapped the thermal blankets from Ray's emergency kit securely around both victims, creating a layered insulation system to retain what little body heat remained. The woman was of average build, perhaps 5.6, and 130 pounds. Manageable for Michael to carry, despite his own old injuries. The challenging part would be keeping the child secure during transport without separating the two victims, which could further endanger both. Using rescue straps from the woman's professional gear, Michael created a secure harness system that kept the child firmly positioned against the woman's chest. With careful movements, he lifted the bundled pair from the SUV, immediately feeling the brutal assault of the blizzard as he emerged from the vehicle. The German Shepherd exited behind him, positioning itself directly in front, once again breaking trail through the deepening snow. Despite its exhaustion and injury, the dog seemed to understand the critical nature of these moments, maintaining focus with remarkable discipline. The journey back to Michael's truck, though only about 30 yards, was grueling. The wind had intensified further, driving snow horizontally with such force that each step forward required deliberate effort. Michael's old combat injuries protested the additional weight, sending shooting pain through his damaged leg, but his focus remained absolute. Reach the truck, get the victims warm, find medical help. When they finally reached his vehicle, Michael carefully placed the bundled victims across the back seat. He quickly started the engine and turned the heating system to maximum, directing all vents toward the rear of the cabin. The German Shepherd jumped in without command, positioning itself protectively next to its handler, its body providing additional warmth. Michael retrieved a satellite phone from his emergency gear, standard equipment for his remote lifestyle, and one of the few reliable communication methods during severe Montana storms. He dialed emergency services, understanding that even with this technology, actual rescue might be hours away, given the deteriorating conditions. The call connected. After several tense moments, the dispatcher's voice cutting intermittently through static. Michael provided a precise situation report with military efficiency, location, number of victims, observed conditions, actions taken so far. The dispatcher confirmed his worst fears. The main roads to Pinewood Ridge were already impassable for standard emergency vehicles, and helicopter evacuation was impossible in the current weather. "Nearest accessible medical facility?" Michael asked, knowing time was critical, especially for the woman who showed signs of severe hypothermia. "Clearwater Medical Clinic in Eastridge might still be reachable," the dispatcher responded. "It's smaller, but has emergency capabilities. Approximately 22 miles northeast of your position. I'm sending you GPS coordinates now." Michael knew the location, a route that would take him away from Pinewood Ridge through less populated areas, but potentially passable with his modified truck. The dispatcher promised to alert the clinic of their pending arrival and to deploy snowplows to begin clearing critical sections of the route. With the immediate communication complete, Michael returned his attention to the victims. The child had begun showing signs of responsiveness, small movements and slight changes in breathing patterns, suggesting he might regain consciousness soon. The woman, however, remained deeply unresponsive, her condition apparently more severe. Michael checked her identification, found in a professional case in her search and rescue pack. Captain Alexandra Alex Winters, Wilderness Search and Rescue, Colorado Division. Specialized in high-altitude and winter operations, various certifications including Advanced Wilderness Life Support and K-9 Handler qualification, a professional rescuer who now needed rescuing herself. The irony wasn't lost on Michael as he examined the German Shepherd's tags, which confirmed the dog's name. Ranger, WSAR Tactical Response Unit. "You did good, Ranger," Michael said quietly, offering a gentle pat to the loyal animal who had accomplished something extraordinary. The dog briefly acknowledged the gesture before returning its attention to its handler. With the truck's heating system now producing substantial warmth, Michael turned to the more detailed assessment and care he'd been trained to provide during his military service. He carefully checked both victims for frostbite, noting with relief that the woman had apparently protected both herself and the child from the worst possibilities by keeping extremities covered and close to body heat sources. The child began to stir more actively, eventually opening his eyes with the disoriented expression of someone waking in an unfamiliar place. He initially showed signs of distress until spotting the German Shepherd, at which point he visibly relaxed. "Ranger," the boy murmured weakly, reaching a small hand toward the dog, who responded by gently nuzzling the child's fingers. "Hi there," Michael said softly, careful not to appear threatening. "My name's Michael. Ranger found me and brought me to help you. Can you tell me your name?" The boy looked at him with deep brown eyes, still clouded with confusion. "Ethan," he eventually replied, his voice barely audible. "Is Miss Alex okay?" The question confirmed what Michael had already surmised. The woman was not the child's parent, but apparently his rescuer, who had subsequently become imperiled herself. "Miss Alex needs medical help, which is where we're going right now," Michael explained, keeping his tone calm and confident despite his concerns about the woman's deteriorating condition. "Can you tell me what happened, Ethan?" The child's response was fragmented, his young mind struggling to organize the traumatic events into coherent narrative. From the pieces Michael could assemble, Ethan had been at a remote cabin with his family when he wandered off exploring. He became lost in the woods as the storm approached, triggering a search operation. Alex and Ranger had found him, but during their return journey, their vehicle had slid off the increasingly treacherous road and become disabled. "She gave me her jacket and sleeping bag," Ethan said, his voice strengthening slightly as the truck's warmth began to restore him. "She said Ranger would find help and to trust him." The professional handler had made the calculated decision to send her trained partner for assistance rather than attempting to navigate the blizzard herself, a choice that had likely saved both her life and Ethan's, though at significant risk to the loyal German Shepherd. As Michael prepared to begin the challenging drive to the medical facility, he heard a faint sound from the woman, not quite consciousness, but a shifting that suggested she wasn't as deeply unconscious as before. Her survival instincts were fighting despite the severe hypothermia. The drive to Eastridge under normal conditions would take approximately 40 minutes. In the current blizzard, with roads unplowed and visibility reduced to mere yards, Michael estimated it might take 3 times as long if they could make it at all. The modified F-250 was equipped for extreme conditions, but even the most capable vehicle had limitations. Nevertheless, there was no alternative. Alex Winters needed advanced medical care that couldn't wait for emergency services to eventually reach them. Michael shifted into drive and began the treacherous journey, maintaining a careful balance between necessary speed and dangerous haste. The first few miles were among the most challenging driving conditions Michael had ever experienced. The snow had accumulated to depths that occasionally reached the truck's headlights, requiring careful navigation and constant adjustments. Several times, the vehicle threatened to become stuck, the wheels spinning momentarily before finding purchase. Each time, Michael utilized the techniques he'd developed over years of navigating Montana's harshest winter conditions. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere had stabilized into a tense but functional arrangement. Ethan had become more alert as his body temperature normalized, though he remained bundled in thermal blankets. Ranger maintained his position beside Alex, the dog's disciplined vigilance unbroken despite its own exhaustion and injuries. Michael divided his attention between the treacherous road conditions and occasional checks on his passengers, particularly Alex, whose condition remained the most concerning. Approximately 40 minutes into their journey, they encountered the first evidence of emergency response, a county snowplow working to clear a critical section of the route. The massive vehicle had carved a passable lane through otherwise impassable drifts, allowing Michael to increase their speed slightly for that stretch. The plow operator radioed confirmation of their passing to emergency dispatch, establishing a communication chain that would track their progress toward the medical facility. As they passed through a small clearing that briefly allowed cellular reception, Michael's phone registered a series of incoming messages. Among them was one from Ray at the gas station, who had successfully contacted local authorities and provided initial information about the situation. Another message confirmed that Clearwater Medical Clinic had enacted their emergency protocol and was preparing to receive the hypothermia victims. The journey continued with agonizing slowness, each mile a battle against conditions that seemed determined to prevent their progress. Yet Michael maintained the steady, methodical approach that had served him through combat zones and personal battles alike. Focus on the immediate objective, address obstacles as they appear, conserve resources for the challenges ahead. "Are we going to make it?" Ethan asked quietly during a particularly difficult stretch where the truck struggled through a drift that nearly reached the hood. Michael glanced briefly at the child, noting the fear behind the question. "Yes," he replied with simple certainty. "We're going to make it." The statement wasn't mere comfort for a frightened child, but a declaration of intent. Michael had made a commitment the moment he chose to follow Ranger into the storm. These people would survive, regardless of what that required from him. The German Shepherd seemed to sense the exchange, briefly lifting its head to meet Michael's, a gaze in the rearview mirror. In that moment, Michael felt an unexpected kinship with the animal, both of them shaped by specialized training, both accustomed to pushing beyond normal limitations when lives depended on their performance. They had covered approximately half the distance to Eastridge when Alex began showing more substantial signs of responsiveness. Her breathing pattern changed, becoming more regular, and occasional movements suggested she was approaching consciousness, though not yet fully aware. Nearly 2 hours after beginning their journey, the outskirts of Eastridge finally appeared. Through the swirling snow, a small cluster of lights that represented salvation. The storm had somewhat abated in this area, though conditions remained hazardous. Emergency vehicles were visible at key intersections, creating a marked route to the medical facility. Clearwater Medical Clinic was modest compared to a full hospital, but represented the only accessible emergency care within a 100-mile radius during the blizzard. As Michael's truck approached, medical personnel in winter gear emerged from the building with gurneys and emergency equipment, a welcome sight after the grueling journey. The next minutes passed in a blur of activity as both victims were transferred. Into the facility, Dr. Elizabeth Chen, the clinic's emergency physician, directed the operation with calm efficiency, immediately recognizing the severity of Alex's condition and prioritizing her treatment accordingly. "You got them here just in time," Dr. Chen told Michael as the initial assessment proceeded. "Another hour, and we might have been having a very different conversation, especially for the woman." Only then, with his urgent mission completed, did Michael become aware of his own exhaustion. The adrenaline that had sustained him through the rescue and treacherous journey began to subside, allowing the pain from his old injuries to surface with renewed intensity. A clinic nurse approached, offering to examine him as well, but Michael declined. "I'm fine," he insisted, though the statement was more habit than truth. "What about the dog? He's injured too, traveled miles through the blizzard to find help." This information visibly impressed the medical staff, who immediately arranged for the clinic's part-time veterinarian to examine Ranger. The German Shepherd initially resisted separation from Alex, but gentle coaxing and the promise of treatment for its injured paws eventually persuaded the loyal animal to allow examination. As the emergency team worked to stabilize Alex and confirm Ethan's improving condition, Michael found himself in the clinic's waiting area, processing the extraordinary sequence of events that had begun with a desperate dog approaching his truck at a remote gas station. What had started as a routine supply run had transformed into a life-or-death rescue operation, connecting him with people he would never otherwise have encountered. The realization was uncomfortable for someone who had deliberately chosen isolation, yet there was an undeniable sense of purpose in what had transpired, a clarity of mission he hadn't experienced since leaving military service. Dr. Chen emerged from the treatment area after approximately an hour, her expression considerably more relaxed than during the initial emergency response. "Both patients are stable," she reported. "The boy is doing remarkably well. Some mild hypothermia and exhaustion, but no lasting damage. He's asking for both you and the dog." "And the woman? Alex?" "Captain Winters is responding to treatment, though more slowly. Her core temperature was dangerously low when you brought her in. Severe hypothermia. She sacrificed her own safety to protect the child, giving him nearly all their available insulation and warmth. It's quite extraordinary she survived at all." The veterinarian joined them moments later with an update on Ranger. "Remarkable animal," she stated with professional admiration. "Severe lacerations to all paw pads, early frostbite on ears and tail tip, dehydration and exhaustion, yet he remained functional. These working dogs have pain tolerance and focus that defies normal explanation." As Michael absorbed this information, his phone rang, the local sheriff finally reaching him directly after coordinating with emergency services throughout the rescue operation. The conversation was brief but informative. Ethan's family had been located and were attempting to reach Eastridge as road conditions permitted. Captain Winter's search and rescue team had been notified of her condition, and the full story of the day's events was beginning to circulate throughout the regional emergency response community. The small waiting room at Clearwater Medical Clinic gradually filled as news of the dramatic rescue spread throughout Eastridge despite the ongoing storm. Local first responders, off-duty medical personnel, and concerned citizens gathered, drawn by both professional interest and genuine concern for the victims. Michael found himself the reluctant center of attention, uncomfortable with the steady stream of questions and expressions of admiration for his actions. "Just did what needed doing," he repeated when pressed for details, retreating further into the corner chair he'd claimed near the clinic's flickering fireplace. The simple wood stove had been installed decades earlier, but remained functional, providing both warmth and a focal point for the growing impromptu community gathering. Sheriff Dan Hollister arrived after navigating the treacherous roads from the county office, his weathered face grave as he approached Michael. At 58, the sheriff had seen most everything the harsh Montana environment could produce during his 30-year career in law enforcement. Yet even he seemed impressed by the day's events. "That was quite something you pulled off," Hollister said without preamble, settling his substantial frame into the chair next to Michael's. "Most folks would have called it impossible." Michael shrugged. uncomfortable with the characterization. The dog did the impossible part. I just drove. Through the worst blizzard we've had in 15 years, with 2 critical patients, in conditions that stopped my department's specialized vehicles, Hollister countered. Ray Miller called it in. From the gas station, said you didn't hesitate when that shepherd showed up. Military training. You assess, decide, execute, Michael replied, deliberately simplifying the complex calculations and risk evaluations he'd performed almost instinctively when confronted with Ranger's silent plea for help. The sheriff studied him with the practiced gaze of someone accustomed to reading people. Miller mentioned you live out past Broken Ridge. Don't think we've crossed paths before. The observation carried an unspoken question about Michael's deliberately isolated existence, one he had no interest in addressing. Fortunately, they were interrupted by the clinic's door swinging open, admitting both a blast of frigid air and Dr. Sophia Martinez, the region's only veterinary specialist who had been summoned to consult on Ranger's condition. Despite the brutal weather, Dr. Martinez had apparently wasted no time responding to the call. Snow still clung to her dark hair and the shoulders of her heavy parka as she stamped her boots on the entry mat, her expression conveying both urgency and professional determination. "Where's my patient?" she asked without preamble, addressing the room generally. A clinic nurse quickly approached to guide her toward the makeshift treatment area where Ranger was being monitored. Michael rose to follow, his concern for the extraordinary animal outweighing his desire to avoid further interaction. Sheriff Hollister joined him, equally interested in the German shepherd's condition. They found Ranger resting on a padded examination table, his injured paws carefully bandaged, IV fluids running into a catheter placed in his foreleg. Despite his exhausted state, the dog lifted his head alertly when they entered, his intelligent eyes immediately focusing on Michael with unmistakable recognition. Dr. Martinez began her examination without acknowledging the observers, her hands moving with practiced efficiency as she checked Ranger's vital signs and reviewed the treatment notes from the clinic staff. "Remarkable animal," she finally stated, echoing the earlier assessment. "Most dogs would have collapsed long before reaching help in these conditions. The injury patterns suggest he traveled at least 7 miles through deep snow with lacerated paw pads and early-stage hypothermia. Will he recover fully?" Michael asked, the question emerging with unexpected urgency. Dr. Martinez glanced up, seeming to truly notice him for the first time. "Yes, with proper treatment and rest. The paw injuries will require dedicated care for several weeks, and there may be some minor permanent damage to the ear tips from frostbite, but nothing that should impact his working capabilities." She returned her attention to Ranger, administering additional medications through the IV line. "This isn't just any search and rescue dog. The tactical collar and training markers indicate specialized operations background, military-grade performance capacity. Like his handler," Sheriff Hollister remarked quietly. Before Michael could respond to the sheriff's perceptive comment, a nurse appeared in the doorway. "Captain Winters is regaining consciousness," she announced. "She's asking about the child and her dog." Dr. Martinez immediately gathered her medical supplies. "I should be present when she sees Ranger. The bond between these tactical handlers and their partners is extraordinary. Seeing him will likely accelerate her recovery more than any medication I could administer." The small procession moved through the clinic's narrow hallway toward the treatment room, where Alex Winters was being monitored. Michael found himself hesitating at the threshold, suddenly aware that he had no official reason to enter. This was becoming more personal than the straightforward rescue operation he'd initially undertaken. Dr. Chen noticed his hesitation and motioned him forward. "You should be here," she said simply. "She'll want to thank the person who saved both her charges." Inside, the transformation in Alex Winters was remarkable compared to the critically hypothermic patient Michael had transported. Color had returned to her face, and though she remained weak, her eyes were alert and focused. Various monitoring equipment surrounded her bed, displaying vital signs that had apparently improved significantly since her arrival. "Ranger!" she called immediately upon seeing the German shepherd, her voice hoarse but filled with obvious relief and affection. Dr. Martinez carefully lifted the bandaged dog onto a specially prepared surface beside Alex's bed, allowing handler and partner to reunite. The moment was intensely private, despite the medical personnel present, a wordless communication passing between woman and dog that transcended ordinary understanding. Alex gently touched Ranger's face, examining him with the critical eye of someone intimately familiar with every aspect of her partner's condition. "You did it," she whispered, "just like we trained. You did it perfectly." Only after this reunion did Alex seem to register the others present in the room. Her gaze settled on Michael, assessment and question in her expression. "This is Michael Donovan," Dr. Chen explained. "Ranger found him at Miller's gas station. He followed your dog back to your location and transported you and Ethan here through the blizzard." Alex's eyes widened slightly. "You followed a dog into a blizzard?" The question held a note of professional respect rather than surprise. Michael shrugged. He seemed pretty clear about what he wanted. A ghost of a smile touched Alex's pale lips. "Ranger can be persuasive when necessary." Her expression sobered immediately. "Ethan, the boy." "Doing well," Dr. Chen assured her. "Much better than expected, thanks to your actions. His parents have been notified and are attempting to reach us as road conditions permit." Alex closed her eyes briefly, visible relief washing over her features. When she opened them again, her gaze returned to Michael with new intensity. "Thank you doesn't begin to cover it, but it's what I have. Thank you for trusting my partner and for getting us here." The simple sincerity of her gratitude made Michael more uncomfortable than the earlier praise from strangers. He nodded acknowledgement, but found himself unable to formulate an adequate response. Sheriff Hollister filled the silence, stepping forward with his notebook ready. "Captain Winters, I know you're recovering, but I'm trying to piece together the full situation for my report. Are you up to answering a few questions?" Alex shifted slightly, visibly gathering her professional composure despite her weakened state. "Of course, Sheriff. Can you explain what brought you and your K-9 to our county? My understanding is you're based with Colorado Search and Rescue." "Specialized mutual aid request," Alex replied. "I'm part of a tactical K-9 team that deploys for high-risk winter operations across state lines when needed. Local search teams had been looking for Ethan Warren for approximately 14 hours without success when temperatures started dropping. Critically, my team was requested specifically because of Ranger's cold weather tracking capabilities." Michael listened with growing interest as Alex outlined the sequence of events that had preceded his involvement. Ethan had wandered away from his family's vacation rental during a momentary lapse in supervision the previous day, just as the first wave of the blizzard was approaching. Local search efforts had been hampered by rapidly deteriorating weather conditions, eventually necessitating the call for specialized resources. "We located Ethan approximately 6 miles from the rental property, sheltering under a fallen tree," Alex continued. "He was already showing signs of hypothermia, but was conscious and mobile. We began emergency warming procedures and started back toward the extraction point where our team vehicle was waiting." She paused, fatigue evident in her features, but continued after a moment. "Road conditions deteriorated faster than predicted. Our vehicle slid off the access road about halfway back to base operations. The engine died and wouldn't restart, likely. Fuel line freezing. No cell service, radio communication compromised by terrain and weather. The clinical, almost report-like delivery couldn't disguise the life or death decisions that had followed. Standard protocol in such situations is to remain with the vehicle and await rescue, but Ethan's condition was deteriorating despite my emergency measures." Temperature was dropping rapidly, and forecasts indicated at least 12 more hours of blizzard conditions. Alex's hand moved to rest on Ranger's head, drawing evident strength from her partner's presence. I determined that our best chance was to implement separation protocol, sending Ranger to locate assistance while I focused on keeping Ethan alive with our limited resources. The matter-of-fact description of her choice to sacrifice her own safety for the child's while sending her canine partner into life-threatening conditions struck Michael profoundly. He recognized in her calm recounting the same disciplined calculation he had employed in combat, the ability to make impossible decisions when lives hung in the balance. Ranger is trained for independent operation in emergency scenarios, Alex explained. The protocol requires me to remain in place while he seeks assistance. I provided him with his tactical vest, which contains emergency identifiers and location aids. Sheriff Hollister nodded, making notes as she spoke. And you gave your protective gear to the child. Standard procedure when dealing with pediatric victims, Alex replied. Though everyone present understood, there was nothing standard about surrendering your survival equipment in a lethal blizzard. Children lose body heat more rapidly and have fewer physiological reserves. I retained sufficient insulation to maintain core function. The sheriff's expression revealed his professional assessment of what sufficient insulation to maintain core function had actually meant. The bare minimum to prevent immediate death, with no margin for error or additional time. Alex had made a calculated gamble with her own life to ensure Ethan's survival. How did you know Ranger would find help in time? Michael asked, breaking his silence. The question wasn't part of any official report, but stemmed from his own need to understand the extraordinary trust between handler and dog. Alex met his gaze directly. I didn't know. I calculated probabilities based on his training, the terrain, and potential human activity patterns during the storm. Miller's gas station was the nearest potential contact point with approximate coordinates Ranger could follow. But you couldn't be certain, Michael pressed, recognizing the immense weight of her decision. No, she acknowledged quietly. But I was certain of the outcome if we remained in the vehicle without additional assistance. The stark reality of her choice hung in the air. A professional rescuer making the harshest possible decisions to fulfill her mission, even at the cost of potentially sacrificing both herself and her canine partner. Dr. Chen intervened at this point, noting Alex's increasing fatigue. I think that's enough questions for now. Captain Winters needs rest to continue her recovery. As they prepared to leave, Alex's voice stopped Michael at the doorway. You have military background, she said. It wasn't a question. Michael turned, back surprised. How did you know? A faint smile touched her lips. The way you move, the way you prioritize during the rescue, and the fact that you trusted a tactical working dog without hesitation. Most civilians wouldn't have followed Ranger, especially in those conditions. Before Michael could respond, a commotion in the hallway drew their attention. A nurse appeared in the doorway, slightly breathless. Ethan's asking if he can see Ranger and Captain Winters. He's quite insistent. Dr. Chen considered briefly, then nodded. A short visit should be fine. It might actually help all three of them to be together. Minutes later, Ethan was wheeled into the room in a specially adapted chair, wrapped in warming blankets, but looking remarkably improved compared to the barely conscious child Michael had rescued hours earlier. The boy's face lit up at the sight of both Alex and Ranger, though concern quickly followed as he registered the medical equipment surrounding his rescuer. "Miss Alex, you're okay!" Ethan exclaimed, his voice stronger than might have been expected after his ordeal. "And Ranger too." "We're all okay, thanks to you being so brave," Alex replied, her professional demeanor softening notably when addressing the child. You did exactly what I told you and stayed warm and still while Ranger got help. Ethan nodded solemnly. I remembered everything you said, like how you told me in the car that Ranger is a super dog who would bring back help if we just trusted him. His gaze shifted to Michael. And he found you? He did, Michael confirmed simply. He's quite a dog. The child's innocent perspective on their harrowing experience struck Michael forcefully. What adults recognized as a near-fatal disaster with multiple decision points where lives hung in the balance, Ethan had processed as an adventure with his super dog, Rescuer. The resilience of children in traumatic situations was something Michael had witnessed before, but it remained remarkable each time he encountered it. As medical staff monitored the reunion carefully for signs of stress in any of the patients, Sheriff Hollister received a radio call that drew him to the hallway. He returned moments later with updated information. Road crews have managed to clear emergency access to Highway 41, he announced. Ethan's parents should be arriving within the hour, and a specialized medical transport is en route from Regional Hospital to evaluate Captain Winters for potential transfer once the main roads are passable. The news created a palpable shift in the room's atmosphere. The crisis phase was truly ending, with normal procedures and protocols reasserting themselves. For Michael, it signaled a natural conclusion to his involvement, an opportunity to withdraw. Now that official channels were functioning again, as if sensing his thoughts, Dr. Martinez approached him quietly. We need to discuss ongoing care for Ranger, she said, deliberately including him in the continuing situation. Captain Winters will require hospitalization for at least several days, possibly longer, and the dog can't accompany her to Regional. Their facilities aren't equipped for canine patients, especially ones requiring specialized treatment. What about the Colorado team? Michael asked. Surely they have protocols for injured K9 units. Dr. Martinez nodded. They do, but the earliest they could reach us would be tomorrow, assuming the interstate passes are reopened. Ranger needs continuous monitoring and treatment for at least the next 24-48 hours. The implication was clear, though diplomatically unstated. Someone needed to take responsibility for the remarkable dog until either his handler was released or his unit could retrieve him. The local clinic wasn't equipped for overnight animal care, especially during a weather emergency when staff were already stretched thin. Before Michael could formulate a response, Alex spoke from her bed, having overheard the exchange. Ranger will listen to you, she said simply. He's already established trust. That's significant for a tactical dog. Her words carried more weight than the practical logistics of the situation. Michael understood she was entrusting him with her partner, a level of trust that went beyond mere convenience or necessity. I'm not set up for, he began, the automatic resistance to involvement rising to the surface. You have shelter, heat, and the ability to administer his medications. Dr. Martinez interrupted matter-of-factly. I can provide everything else you'll need, including detailed instructions. Michael looked at Ranger, who returned his gaze with that same uncanny intelligence that had first convinced him to follow the dog into the blizzard. There was something in that connection that defied his practiced isolation, an unspoken understanding that transcended his carefully constructed barriers. Just until transport is arranged, he finally conceded, the decision feeling simultaneously foreign and inevitable. Sheriff Hollister, who had been observing the exchange with interest, nodded, slightly as if confirming a theory. I can help transport the dog to your cabin once he's stabilized for travel, and coordinate with the Colorado team about retrieval options. The matter settled with surprising finality. Michael found himself in the uncomfortably novel position of having made a commitment that extended beyond the immediate emergency. It had been years since he'd allowed himself to be responsible for another living being, a deliberate choice following the psychological aftermath of his military service and failed relationships. As the conversation shifted to practical arrangements, Michael watched the interaction between Alex, Ethan, and Ranger. Despite their respective injuries and the trauma they had endured, there was something whole and connected in their engagement with each other, a reminder of human resilience that Michael had deliberately distanced himself from in his isolated existence. When Ethan was eventually wheeled back to his treatment room to prepare for his parents' arrival, and Alex had drifted into much-needed sleep with Ranger maintaining vigilant watch from his position beside her bed, Michael found himself in the clinic's small cafeteria, mechanically consuming a meal he barely tasted. The events of the day had depleted him more than he'd initially recognized. The combination of physical exertion, sustained adrenaline, and unexpected emotional engagement leaving him profoundly fatigued. Sheriff Hollister joined him, setting down a cup of coffee that steamed in the overly warm room. "Thought you might want to know. The storm's finally breaking. Forecasters say we should see clear conditions by morning, though temperatures will remain well below zero." Michael nodded acknowledgement, grateful for practical information that required no personal engagement. The sheriff studied him over the rim of his coffee cup. "You know, most folks around here would be telling this story to anyone who'd listen, maybe calling the regional news stations. You haven't even called anyone to say you'll be delayed getting home." The observation hung in the air, not quite a question, but carrying unmistakable curiosity about Michael's deliberately solitary existence. "Nothing to tell," Michael responded flatly, hoping to discourage further conversation. Hollister seemed unperturbed by the rebuff. "Miller says you've been coming to his station about once a week for 3 years, says you're unfailingly polite, pay in cash, and never share more than basic pleasantries. Figures you for military from the way you carry yourself, but respects your privacy enough not to ask." Michael remained silent, unwilling to either confirm or deny the assessment. His expression must have communicated his discomfort with the topic as Hollister raised a placating hand. "Not trying to pry into your business," the sheriff assured him. "Just making an observation that might be relevant to your new temporary responsibility. That dog in there isn't just any injured animal needing care. He's a specialized working dog with tactical training and a deep bond with his handler. Might be useful to understand that his background probably isn't so different from yours." Michael considered Sheriff Hollister's words as they finished their coffee in silence. The sheriff's insights were uncomfortably perceptive, drawing connections Michael had been avoiding since the moment Ranger had appeared at the gas station. The recognition he'd felt, one trained tactical operator identifying another, had been immediate but carefully suppressed beneath the practical demands of the emergency. "Dr. Martinez says Ranger should be stable enough for transport in about 2 hours, Hollister eventually continued, respecting Michael's silence on personal matters by shifting to logistical concerns. "I can escort you both back to your place. Once the main roads are partially cleared, my department's vehicles can handle the conditions better than most." Michael nodded, grateful for the return to practical matters. "I need to make a supply run if I'm going to have a guest." The word felt strange in his mouth, applied to either human or canine visitor. His cabin had been solely his domain for so long that the concept of preparing it for another seemed almost foreign. "The Market Street Pharmacy should be open despite the storm," Hollister suggested. "They usually stock basic veterinary supplies for the ranchers around here. Might save you a trip later." The next 2 hours passed in methodical preparation. Michael purchased additional supplies, focusing on practical necessities with the same tactical efficiency he applied to all tasks. The pharmacy indeed had a reasonable selection of veterinary basics, and the owner, upon hearing about Ranger's condition, added several specialized items at no charge, a small-town gesture of solidarity that Michael acknowledged with quiet thanks. At the clinic, Ethan's parents had arrived, their tearful reunion with their son creating a ripple of emotional relief throughout the facility. Michael deliberately avoided the scene, uncomfortable with the raw display of feeling after so long insulating himself from such connections. Instead, he joined Dr. Martinez in reviewing Ranger's treatment plan. The most critical elements are preventing infection in the paw injuries and maintaining his medication schedule, the veterinarian explained, demonstrating proper bandage-changing techniques. He'll need limited movement for at least 48 hours to allow the wound edges to stabilize, followed by gradually increasing activity as the healing progresses. Michael absorbed the instructions with focused attention, treating the information like a mission briefing, essential data to be memorized and executed with precision. The approach allowed him to maintain emotional distance while ensuring he could fulfill the practical requirements of the task he'd accepted. He's been through significant trauma, Dr. Martinez continued, her voice softening as she gently examined Ranger's bandaged paws. Not just physical, but psychological. These working dogs form intense bonds with their handlers. Being separated from Captain Winters during her medical treatment will be stressful for him, especially given the circumstances of their separation during the rescue operation. "How do I manage that?" Michael asked, recognizing the importance of the issue, but uncertain how to address something so intangible. "Consistency and calm," she advised. "Tactical dogs respond to confident handling and clear routines. He knows you're connected to his handler's safety, which gives you an advantage. Don't try to replace her in his affections. That's not the goal. Just provide steady, predictable care until they can be reunited." As they completed the preparation for transport, Captain Winters awakened briefly. Though still weak, she asked to speak with Michael privately before he departed with Ranger. The medical staff cleared the room reluctantly, allowing a few minutes of conversation, despite their concerns about her conserving strength. "Ranger responds to standard tactical commands," Alex explained, her voice stronger than earlier, but still bearing the effects of her ordeal. "He'll be anxious about leaving me here, so maintain clear boundaries and expectations. It helps him manage stress." Michael nodded, recognizing the professional-to-professional nature of her guidance. "Any specific protocols I should be aware of? He'll patrol your perimeter if allowed. It's ingrained behavior when in unfamiliar territory. Let him complete at least one full circuit when you arrive. It helps him establish a secure environment. After that, he should settle if you give him a direct stand-down command." She paused, seeming to consider how much specialized information to share. "He's trained to alert to certain threat signatures that most civilian dogs wouldn't recognize. If he shows sudden vigilance without obvious cause, take it seriously." The warning carried implications about Ranger's military-adjacent training that aligned with Michael's earlier observations. This wasn't simply a search and rescue dog, but one with additional tactical capabilities, likely including threat detection. "Protocols developed for combat environments. I'll bring him back to visit when you're stronger," Michael offered, surprising himself with the commitment. It wasn't necessary for the dog's welfare, and would mean another trip into town, something he typically avoided, yet the words had emerged almost automatically. Alex's expression softened slightly. "He'd appreciate that. So would I." She hesitated, then added, "Most people wouldn't have followed him into that storm. You recognize something in him that others might have missed." The observation came too close to acknowledging the unspoken connection, one tactical operator recognizing another that Michael had been carefully avoiding. He nodded non-committally and moved toward the door, signaling an end to the conversation. "One more thing," Alex called, her voice taking on a more official tone. "Ranger's service vest contains a specialized tracking device in the reinforced collar panel. His unit monitors it remotely. If you remove it completely, it will trigger an automatic alert to his handling team." The information was delivered neutrally, but Michael understood its dual purpose, both practical instruction and subtle warning that the dog's whereabouts would be monitored by professionals who took his welfare seriously. "Understood," he replied. Simply, when Sheriff Hollister arrived to transport them, the process moved with efficient speed. Ranger was carefully loaded into the specialized rear compartment of the sheriff's vehicle, his bandaged paws protected by additional padding. Dr. Martinez provided a final review of medication schedules and warning signs that would necessitate immediate veterinary intervention, then sealed an impressive collection of supplies in weatherproof containers. The journey to Michael's cabin proceeded in relative silence, broken only by occasional updates from the sheriff's radio as county road crews continued their battle against the storm's aftermath. Ranger remained alert throughout the drive, his gaze frequently fixing on Michael through the compartment divider as if continuously re-evaluating his temporary guardian. "Never seen a dog with such human eyes," Hollister commented during a particularly long stretch of unplowed road. "Makes you wonder what's going on behind them." Michael had been thinking the same thing, but merely nodded, uncomfortable with the anthropomorphizing, yet unable to dismiss the uncanny intelligence evident in the German shepherd's assessment. As they approached the turnoff to his property, Michael felt an unfamiliar tension building, the strange anticipation of bringing another living being into his carefully controlled environment. The isolation of his cabin had been deliberately chosen and meticulously maintained as both protection and penance for the failures he had left behind. Now that self-imposed exile would be temporarily shared, disrupting the patterns that had structured his existence for years. "Quite the setup you've got here," Hollister observed as they navigated the final approach to the cabin. The structure itself was modest. A traditional Montana design built of heavy logs with a metal roof designed to shed snow, but the surrounding property showed evidence of significant security measures. Motion-activated lighting illuminated their approach, and carefully positioned cameras monitored the access road from multiple angles. Michael didn't respond to the implied question about his security precautions. Such measures might seem excessive for a civilian home in rural Montana, but they were routine for someone whose combat experiences had permanently altered his perception of safety. The cabin itself sat partially sheltered by a natural rock formation that protected it from the worst of the northern winds. Solar panels on the south-facing roof supplemented a propane generator system, while a wood-burning stove provided the primary heat source. The overall impression was one of practical self-sufficiency rather than comfort, though the interior, when they finally entered, revealed more attention to livability than might have been expected. "Where should we set him up?" Hollister asked, carefully supporting Ranger as the dog navigated the cabin's entrance with obvious discomfort from his injured paws. Michael had already prepared a space near the main wood stove, arranging blankets over a specialized foam pad he normally used for camping. "Here," he indicated. "It's the warmest spot in the cabin." As Alex had predicted, Ranger showed immediate interest in inspecting the unfamiliar environment. Despite his injuries, the dog moved with deliberate purpose from room to room, his tactical training evident in the systematic way he cleared each space before moving to the next. Even hampered by bandaged paws, his movements demonstrated the precision and focus of a security professional conducting an assessment. Michael allowed the inspection without interference, recognizing the behavior as consistent with both Alex's warning and his own experiences with military working dogs. Only when Ranger had completed a full circuit of the cabin's interior did Michael issue the stand-down command Alex had suggested. The effect was immediate. The German shepherd returned to the prepared bedding and settled into a vigilant rest posture, alert but no longer actively patrolling. The display of disciplined response to authorized commands reinforced Michael's assessment of the dog's specialized training. Sheriff Hollister observed the interaction with evident interest. "Impressive animal," he commented as they unloaded. "The medical supplies. Clearly recognizes you as temporary handler." "Just following his actual handler's instructions," Michael corrected, uncomfortable with the implied relationship. "He's disciplined enough to transfer operational respect to an authorized temporary caretaker. Standard protocol for tactical assets." The sheriff raised an eyebrow at the terminology but didn't comment directly. "I'll check in tomorrow once the roads are more passable," he said instead. "The Colorado team has been updated on his location and condition. They're coordinating with Captain Winter's medical team about transport options once the interstates reopen." After the sheriff's departure, Michael found himself in the unfamiliar position of sharing his space with another living being for the first time in years. The cabin, normally silent except for the practical sounds of his daily routines, now contained the subtle but unmistakable presence of another's breathing, movement, and attention. Following Dr. Martinez's instructions, Michael administered Ranger's evening medications and changed his bandages with careful precision. The dog submitted to the treatment with stoic patience, though Michael noted the occasional tensing when particularly sensitive areas were addressed. "Almost done," Michael found himself saying, the reassurance emerging unexpectedly. He typically worked in silence even when alone, finding verbal expression unnecessary without an audience. Yet something about Ranger's contained discomfort prompted the uncharacteristic communication. After completing the medical care, Michael resumed his normal evening routine, deliberately maintaining the structured patterns that organized his isolated life. He prepared a simple meal, checked his security systems, and reviewed weather reports on his satellite-connected tablet. Throughout these activities, he remained acutely aware of Ranger's unwavering attention, the dog's intelligent gaze, following his movements with quiet assessment. "Not much for conversation," Michael eventually said, the silence somehow more noticeable for being shared. "That probably works for both of us." Ranger's ears perked at the sound of his voice, but the dog maintained his disciplined rest position, neither seeking interaction nor avoiding it, a professional detachment that Michael recognized and respected. As the evening progressed, Michael found himself periodically checking on his temporary charge, monitoring for signs of distress or changes in condition as instructed. During one such check, he noticed Ranger shivering slightly despite the cabin's adequate heating and his thick coat. "Delayed temperature regulation issues," Michael muttered, recalling Dr. Martinez's warning about possible thermoregulatory disruption following severe cold exposure. He added wood to the stove, building the fire higher than his usual conservative usage typically warranted. When this proved insufficient, he retrieved an additional blanket from his own supplies and carefully draped it over the dog's body, avoiding pressure on the injured paws. The German Shepherd's dark eyes met his during this procedure, a look of such profound intelligence and awareness that Michael found himself momentarily unsettled. There was gratitude in that gaze, certainly, but something more complex as well, a recognition that seemed to penetrate the carefully maintained barriers he had constructed around himself. "Just following protocols," Michael said gruffly, as if the dog had somehow verbalized appreciation that required deflection. "Basic care requirements, nothing more." Ranger continued to regard him steadily, neither accepting nor rejecting this characterization of the assistance. Eventually, the dog's eyes closed as the combined effects of medication, warmth, and exhaustion overcame even his exceptional discipline. His breathing settled into the deeper rhythm of healing sleep, occasionally punctuated by subtle movement as his body processed the trauma it had endured. Michael remained awake longer than usual, completing unnecessary tasks that kept him moving. Through the cabin's main room, where he could monitor his charge, The practical caretaking responsibilities provided a comfortable structure, allowing him to focus on concrete actions rather than the unsettling sense of connection that had been growing since their first encounter at the gas station. When he finally retired to his Spartan bedroom, Michael left the connecting door open, ostensibly to better monitor the dog's condition overnight, though he couldn't entirely dismiss the unfamiliar comfort of another living presence nearby after so many years of complete isolation. Sleep came. Reluctantly, his combat-trained senses hyper-aware of the altered breathing patterns and occasional movements from the main room. Each sound registered as a deviation from the cabin's normal nighttime silence, triggering the vigilance that had never fully subsided, despite years away from active threat environments. Yet there was something different about this hypervigilance, a quality that felt more protective than defensive, more purposeful than paranoid. The distinction was subtle but significant, shifting his awareness from self-preservation to responsibility for another's welfare. Michael woke before dawn, his internal clock maintaining military precision despite the disruptions to his routine. The temperature inside the cabin had dropped slightly overnight as the fire burned down, prompting him to immediately check on Ranger's condition. The German Shepherd was already awake, his alert posture suggesting he had roused at Michael's first movement. "Morning," Michael said simply, moving to rebuild the fire. "Medical check in 5. Ranger's ears perked at the information, his body shifting slightly, as if preparing for the announced procedure. The response reinforced Michael's impression of the dog's exceptional training and intelligence. He clearly understood both language and operational schedules to a degree that exceeded standard canine capabilities. The morning medical check revealed encouraging signs. The paw injuries showed no evidence of increased inflammation, and Ranger's temperature had stabilized within normal range. His willingness to accept small amounts of water and specially prepared food further indicated positive recovery progress. As natural light gradually illuminated the cabin interior, Michael found himself describing his actions aloud as he moved through his morning routine. Not in the baby talk manner some used with animals, but in the clear, concise communication style of operational briefings. "Securing perimeter," he stated, checking the security feeds from cameras positioned around his property. "Roads still largely impassable based on county alerts. Likely no visitors today unless emergency services deployed." Ranger listened with evident attention, his head tilted slightly in a manner that suggested active processing rather than mere response to human voice. When Michael prepared to step outside for his morning firewood collection, the dog attempted to rise, clearly intending to accompany him despite his injuries. "Negative," Michael said firmly, using the command tone he'd observed Alex employing. "Maintain position. Perimeter check is solo operation at this time." The reluctance was visible in Ranger's posture, but his training prevailed. He settled back onto his bedding, though his attention remained fixed on the door after Michael's departure. Outside, the aftermath of the blizzard had transformed the landscape into an alien terrain of sculpted snowdrifts and ice-encrusted trees. The temperature remained well below zero, the air so cold it burned in Michael's lungs, despite his practiced adjustments to Montana's harsh winters. The snow had stopped falling, however, and breaks in the cloud cover suggested improving conditions as forecast. Michael completed his necessary outdoor tasks with efficient speed, gathering firewood from his sheltered store and checking critical external systems. As he worked, he found himself periodically glancing at the cabin windows, aware of Ranger monitoring his movements from inside, an unusual sensation after years of operating without observation. Upon returning, he found the German Shepherd exactly as instructed, maintaining position but clearly relieved at his return. The dog's disciplined adherence to commands, despite evident concern, struck Michael forcefully, reminding him of similar training principles instilled in special operations personnel, the capacity to override instinctual responses in favor of mission protocols, even when those protocols contradicted personal impulses. "Perimeter secure," Michael reported automatically, the phraseology emerging from long-dormant operational habits. "External temperature -15 Fahrenheit. Wind chill approximately -30. Forecast shows gradual warming trend, potentially reaching positive single digits by afternoon." Throughout the morning, Michael maintained this running commentary, the one-sided briefings providing structure to their shared confinement. He found an unexpected comfort in the verbal processing, articulating assessments and plans that would normally remain internal. Rangers' attentive responses reinforced the protocol, creating an operational rhythm that felt both foreign and familiar. By midday, the satellite phone rang, the specialized connection that provided Michael's only reliable communication method during severe weather. Sheriff Hollister's voice came through clearly despite the technology's usual limitations. "Checking in as promised," the sheriff began without preamble. "County roads still mostly impassable except for emergency vehicles. Interstate remains closed at 3 major points. How's your charge doing?" Michael provided a concise update on Ranger's condition, utilizing the clinical terminology Dr. Martinez had employed in her instructions. The precision of the report seemed to amuse Hollister, though he refrained from direct comment on Michael's approach. "The medical transport team reached Clearwater Clinic about an hour ago," Hollister continued. "Captain Winters has been stabilized for transfer to Regional Hospital, where they have specialized hyperbaric treatment options for her residual cold injuries." She asked specifically about Ranger's condition before departure. "What did you tell her?" Michael asked, suddenly concerned about the handler's peace of mind during her own medical crisis. "That he's receiving military-grade care from someone who clearly understands tactical asset protocols," Hollister replied, a smile evident in his voice despite the technical terminology. She seemed satisfied with that assessment. After providing additional updates on road-clearing progress and estimated timelines for interstate reopening, the sheriff concluded the call with a casual observation that struck deeper than intended. "Must be nice having some company out there for a change, even the 4-legged variety." The sheriff's comment lingered in Michael's thoughts long after the call ended. Company wasn't something he had sought or welcomed in years. Yet he couldn't deny the subtle shift in the cabin's atmosphere. The disciplined presence of the tactical dog had altered something fundamental about the space, not invading his carefully cultivated solitude so much as creating a different quality of silence, one punctuated by shared purpose rather than isolated routine. Michael found himself studying Ranger as the afternoon progressed, noting the parallels between the dog's behaviors and those he'd observed in elite human operators. The German Shepherd maintained situational awareness even while resting, his attention shifting to track potential threat vectors whenever unfamiliar sounds occurred outside the cabin. His resource management was equally disciplined, consuming exactly what was offered during feeding times, neither rushing nor wasting, and limiting water intake to efficient quantities. "Operational conservation," Michael observed aloud during one such instance. "Standard procedure for deployment in uncertain conditions." Ranger's ears perked at his voice, dark eyes meeting Michael's with that same uncanny perception that had initially persuaded him to follow the dog into the blizzard. The gaze held neither demand nor dependence, just the clear assessment of one professional acknowledging another across the species barrier. By late afternoon, Michael determined it was time for Ranger's first supervised mobility session. Dr. Martinez had emphasized the importance of preventing muscle atrophy while still protecting the healing paw injuries, a delicate balance requiring careful monitoring. Limited movement protocol initiating, Michael announced, maintaining the operational briefing tone that had become their shared language. Objective: controlled activity without weight-bearing stress on injured extremities. He arranged additional padding on the cabin floor, creating a protected pathway from Ranger's resting area to a slightly more distant position with different environmental perspectives. Following the veterinarian's instructions, he fitted specialized protective booties over the bandaged paws, securing them with the methodical attention he once applied to field equipment inspections. Ranger watched these preparations with evident understanding, neither resisting nor attempting premature movement. When Michael finally issued the release command, "Position change authorized," the dog rose carefully, testing his balance before proceeding along the padded route with deliberate precision. Michael observed each movement with critical assessment, noting gait adjustments and weight distribution patterns that revealed the dog's professional adaptation to injury. Ranger was clearly experienced in working through discomfort, employing the same compensatory techniques Michael had witnessed in veteran special operators who continued functioning despite significant physical trauma. Acceptable performance, Michael concluded when Ranger had completed the prescribed activity session, recovery progressing within expected parameters. The dog settled into his new position with the satisfied demeanor of one who has successfully completed an assigned objective, however modest. This location offered views of both the cabin's main entrance and the largest window, improving surveillance capabilities while still maintaining appropriate distance from potential threat entries. Another tactical choice that reflected specialized training. As evening approached, Michael's satellite phone rang again. The caller ID displayed not Sheriff Hollister's number, but an unfamiliar Colorado area code. He answered with characteristic brevity. "Donovan. Mr. Donovan, this is Major Sarah." "Reynolds, Colorado Tactical K-9 Division," came the crisp, professional response. "I understand you're currently providing care for one of our assets." The formal military language and commanding tone confirmed Michael's earlier suspicions about Ranger's background. While search and rescue was clearly part of his operational profile, the dog's training and handling protocols suggested additional tactical capabilities typically associated with specialized military or law enforcement units. "Affirmative," Michael replied, automatically shifting to the more structured communication style of his former profession. "Asset is stable, receiving prescribed medical care and displaying appropriate recovery indicators." A brief silence followed, as if his response had provided more information than just the words themselves. When Major Reynolds spoke again, her tone had subtly shifted from formal inquiry to professional acknowledgement. "You have military background," she stated rather than asked. "Former Marine Corps, Special Operations," Michael confirmed, seeing no reason to withhold information she had clearly already deduced. "That explains Captain Winter's assessment," Reynolds noted. She reported that Ranger had selected an appropriate temporary handler with compatible operational understanding. The phraseology was telling. Not that Michael had rescued the dog and his handler, but that Ranger had specifically chosen him from potential options. The distinction revealed how these specialized units viewed their canine partners not as tools, but as operational decision-makers with legitimate assessment capabilities. Ranger's Colorado transport team is currently estimating arrival tomorrow afternoon, assuming interstate conditions continue to improve. Reynolds continued. "In the meantime, I'd like to brief you on several aspects of his care that may not have been covered in the emergency handoff." What followed was a detailed technical discussion that confirmed the German Shepherd's exceptional status. Reynolds covered specialized behavioral indicators, stress management techniques, and recovery protocols specific to dogs with tactical deployment histories. Throughout the conversation, she used terminology consistent with elite military units rather than civilian search and rescue operations. One final note, Reynolds added as the briefing concluded. Ranger has been operating continuously for approximately 72 hours, including his initial search mission, the attempted evacuation of the child, and his independent assistance acquisition journey. While his physical injuries are receiving appropriate attention, be aware that tactical K9s can experience delayed stress responses similar to those documented in human operators following extended high-intensity deployments. Combat exhaustion, Michael stated, recognizing the carefully neutral description of what his generation of soldiers had experienced firsthand. Precisely, Reynolds confirmed. These dogs push beyond normal physiological and psychological limits when operational. Requirements demand it, but there's eventually a decompression phase. Given his bond with Captain Winters and the traumatic nature of their separation during critical conditions, Ranger may experience heightened anxiety or vigilance patterns as his physical condition stabilizes. Ranger settled back into his rest position with noticeably reduced tension, the updated information apparently addressing concerns that had lingered despite his disciplined exterior. Michael recognized the pattern from his own military experience, the visceral relief of confirmation that separated team members were alive and that reunion protocols were in place, regardless of how professionally one had been managing the uncertainty. As the scheduled arrival time approached, Michael found himself conducting increasingly unnecessary cabin maintenance tasks, checking systems that had been recently verified, organizing supplies already in proper order, reviewing security feeds with excessive frequency. The behavior was familiar from pre-mission protocols, a ritualized management of anticipatory tension through constructive activity. What he was anticipating, however, remained unclear even to himself. The Colorado team's arrival would mark the successful completion of his temporary assignment, returning Ranger to his proper professional handlers and concluding Michael's involvement in the extraordinary sequence of events that had begun with a desperate dog appearing at a gas station during a blizzard. This return to normal operational parameters should have represented relief, a restoration of the isolated routine he had constructed so carefully. Yet as he completed preparation for the handoff, Michael found himself uncharacteristically attentive to details that went beyond practical necessity, ensuring Ranger's appearance and condition would reflect positively on the care he had received during the temporary assignment. The Colorado team arrived with military precision exactly at the scheduled time, their specialized vehicle navigating the cleared but still challenging access road with professional competence. Michael observed their approach on his security feeds, noting the tactical efficiency with which they established initial perimeter assessment before approaching the cabin directly. Two handlers emerged from the vehicle, their movements and positioning communicating more about their backgrounds than any identification could have provided. They maintained optimum distance from each other while approaching, close enough for coordinated action, far enough apart to prevent a single incident from compromising both operators. Their scan patterns covered overlapping sectors with practiced thoroughness, while their hands remained positioned for immediate access to concealed equipment if necessary. Special operations backgrounds, Michael assessed privately, recognizing the distinctive movement patterns that transcended specific branches of service. These weren't simply dog handlers, but tactical specialists with advanced training, further confirming Ranger's status within a specialized unit that operated beyond conventional search and rescue parameters. When they reached the cabin door, the lead handler knocked with the distinctive pattern of professional courtesy, firm enough to be clearly heard, measured enough to avoid appearing aggressive. Michael opened the door immediately, having prepared for their arrival with the same operational readiness he had once applied to unit transfers in the field. Michael Donovan, he identified himself without extending his hand, recognizing that these operators would appreciate direct communication over social niceties. Lieutenant James Cooper, the lead handler, responded with equal efficiency. "This is Sergeant Maria Vasquez. We're here for Ranger." Their tactical vests bore no obvious unit insignia, but several subtle markers confirmed Michael's assessment of their specialized status. Communication equipment more advanced than standard search and rescue would utilize, modified tactical pouches consistent with specialized mission profiles and the distinctive wear patterns of gear subjected to intensive field operations rather than occasional deployment. "Asset is stable and prepared for transport," Michael reported, stepping aside to allow them entry. "Medical supplies and documentation are packaged according to transport protocols." Cooper's expression revealed momentary reassessment, clearly noting Michael's military terminology and procedural knowledge. "You have service background," he stated, rather than asked, the observation identical to Major Reynolds during their phone conversation. "Marines, Special Operations," Michael confirmed briefly, seeing no advantage in elaborating further. A look of professional recognition passed between the two handlers. "That explains a few things," Cooper commented. "Major Reynolds mentioned you were providing care consistent with tactical asset protocols rather than standard civilian procedures." Inside the cabin, Ranger had maintained his disciplined position despite obvious awareness of the new arrivals. His posture communicated recognition of fellow unit personnel, but awaited formal acknowledgement before responding, another indication of his exceptional training and operational discipline. Cooper approached the German Shepherd with appropriate, professional respect, maintaining proper tactical distance before issuing the formal identification protocol. "Ranger, verification sequence Echo 7-3 Delta." The dog's response was immediate and precise, a specific head position and attention, focus that clearly confirmed recognition of authorized handling personnel, using correct verification codes. Only after this formal exchange did Cooper move to more direct interaction, conducting a thorough but efficient assessment of Ranger's physical condition. "Impressive wound management," he commented, examining the bandaged paws. "These field dressings exceed standard emergency care parameters." "Dr. Martinez provided comprehensive instructions," Michael responded, deflecting the implied compliment. "I followed established protocols." Sergeant Vasquez had meanwhile been reviewing the medical documentation and treatment logs Michael had maintained. "These records are exceptionally detailed," she noted. "Time-stamped medication administration, behavioral observations, environmental condition monitoring. This is tactical field reporting standard, not civilian medical documentation." Michael didn't respond to the obvious question behind her observation, seeing no reason to explain that the detailed reports reflected his natural operational patterns rather than special effort. Such comprehensive documentation had been standard procedure throughout his military career, the habits remaining intact despite years in civilian status. As the Colorado team prepared for transport, Michael found himself conducting a more thorough handoff briefing than strictly necessary, providing detailed information about Rangers' responses to specific medications, environmental preferences, and behavioral patterns observed during their brief time together. He maintains operational awareness even during rest cycles, Michael explained, unable to entirely suppress the professional assessment that had formed during their time together. "Shows advanced threat discrimination capabilities, particularly regarding wildlife approach patterns. Successfully identified a mountain lion at approximately 80 yards, despite adverse night conditions and multiple terrain obstacles." Cooper nodded, unsurprised by this information. Ranger has specialized training in predator detection. Part of his tactical profile includes distinguishing between ambient wildlife activity and actual security threats without triggering false positives. The confirmation of Michael's observations regarding Ranger's exceptional capabilities was satisfying from a professional perspective, validating his assessment of the dog as an elite operator rather than merely a well-trained working animal. There was something affirming about having his tactical evaluations taken seriously by fellow professionals after years of isolation from such exchanges. "One more thing," Michael added, as they completed the formal transport preparation. He responds positively to operational briefing language during routine activities, maintains better focus with regular status updates and mission-oriented terminology than with standard commands alone. Sergeant Vasquez exchanged a knowing look with Cooper before responding. That's consistent with his training protocols. These tactical dogs operate most effectively within structured communication frameworks that mirror special operations parameters rather than conventional handling methods. As they prepared for final departure, Michael found himself conducting one last check of the specialized protective booties protecting Ranger's injured paws. An unnecessary verification given the Colorado team's obvious competence, yet somehow important to his sense of completed responsibility. "He's in good hands," Cooper assured him, recognizing the behavior for what it was, the professional concern of one operator for another at the moment of transfer. "Our medical team has been fully briefed by both Dr. Martinez and Captain Winters. Physicians, continuation of care is fully mapped and resourced." Michael nodded acknowledgement, stepping back to establish appropriate distance for the formal handoff procedure. Cooper issued the official transfer command, signaling to Ranger that his temporary assignment had concluded and he was returning to primary unit control. The German Shepherd responded with perfect discipline, rising carefully despite his injuries, and moving to the position indicated beside the specialized transport vehicle. Yet before entering the vehicle as directed, Ranger paused and turned back toward Michael, momentarily breaking protocol in a way that seemed deliberate rather than undisciplined. For a brief moment, the dog simply held his gaze, communicating, something that transcended the formal operational parameters that had structured their interaction. There was acknowledgement in that final look, a recognition of shared experience that needed no verbal expression between two professionals who understood the unspoken language of those who operate beyond normal boundaries when circumstances demand it. "He doesn't do that often," Vasquez noted quietly. "Break protocol for personal acknowledgement." Michael maintained his composure, returning the gaze with appropriate professional respect rather than emotional response. "Safe travel," he said, simply addressing Ranger directly with the formal acknowledgement one operator might offer another at mission conclusion. The German Shepherd held position for one more moment, then turned and entered the transport vehicle with perfect operational discipline, resuming his role within established unit parameters. The Colorado team completed final security checks with practiced efficiency, thanked Michael for his assistance with professional courtesy rather than excessive gratitude, and departed exactly according to their established timeline. Michael watched. The vehicle disappear down his access road, standing longer than necessary in the biting cold as he tracked its progress through each security camera zone, until it passed beyond his property boundaries. Only then did he return inside, the cabin suddenly alien in its restored emptiness. The absence was immediate and pervasive, not simply the physical presence of another living being, but the purposeful energy that had temporarily transformed his isolated space into an operational environment. The silence, once so familiar and carefully cultivated, now seemed hollow rather than peaceful, empty rather than ordered. With methodical precision, Michael began restoring the cabin to its previous condition, removing the specialized bedding. He had arranged near the wood stove, returning furniture to original positions and adjusting environmental systems back to their standard conservation settings. Each action was performed with the same focused attention he applied to all tasks, yet a strange resistance accompanied the process, a reluctance he couldn't entirely identify or explain. As he worked, Michael found himself continuing the operational commentary that had become habitual during Ranger's presence. The running status updates emerging automatically despite the absence of his attentive audience. Returning environmental controls to standard parameters, adjusting security scan intervals to normal frequency, re-establishing baseline operational conditions. The behavior was irrational given the circumstances, yet he couldn't immediately suppress the pattern that had formed so naturally over their brief, shared deployment. It was as if some part of him was reluctant to acknowledge the return to isolated status, clinging to the operational rhythms that had temporarily connected him to another living being after so long alone. Sheriff Hollister's call that evening seemed almost precisely timed to interrupt Michael's unsettled thoughts, the satellite phone's distinctive ring providing welcome distraction from uncomfortable self-examination. Transport team reported successful arrival at their facility, Hollister began without preamble, correctly assuming Michael would appreciate direct information over social preliminaries. Ranger's condition has been assessed as stable and improving. Their medical team concurred with all treatment protocols you implemented. Michael acknowledged the information with his usual brevity, though he found himself uncharacteristically relieved by the confirmation of Ranger's safe arrival, and continued. Recovery. The concern surprised him, a level of investment in another's welfare that had become foreign during his years of deliberate disconnection. There's more, Hollister continued. Captain Winters is showing significant improvement at Regional Hospital. Doctors are optimistic about full recovery. Though her rehabilitation timeline remains extended, she specifically requested I pass along her personal thanks for your care of Ranger. Said something about tactical asset protocols being properly implemented during emergency reassignment. The formal military phrasing clearly amused the sheriff, though he delivered the message without commentary. Michael simply acknowledged receipt of the information, uncomfortable with both the gratitude and Hollister's evident interest in his reaction to it. One last thing, the sheriff added before Michael could end the call. Regional Hospital is hosting a recognition ceremony next week for everyone involved in the rescue operation. The governor's office is sending a representative, and several media outlets have requested coverage. They've asked me to extend a formal invitation for your participation. The mere thought of such an event, public recognition, media attention, forced social interaction with strangers, triggered an immediate visceral rejection in Michael. His years of isolation hadn't been random, but deliberately constructed, a protective barrier between himself and a world he no longer knew how to navigate without the structured parameters of military service. Not possible, he responded automatically, the refusal emerging with perhaps more force than intended. Hollister seemed unsurprised by the response. Figured that might be your answer. Told them you're not one for public ceremonies, but I promised I'd pass along the invitation regardless. After a brief pause, the sheriff added with casual precision, Captain Winters will be attending despite her medical condition. Apparently, she's quite determined to publicly acknowledge Ranger's extraordinary performance and the role you played in ensuring both her survival and the child's. The additional information created an unexpected complication in Michael's reflexive refusal. The professional acknowledgement of a fellow operator carried weight that civilian recognition did not, creating an obligation he couldn't entirely dismiss despite his aversion to public exposure. I'll consider it, he finally conceded, the words emerging reluctantly. Hollister's tone suggested he recognized the significance of even this minimal concession. Fair enough. Let me know if you need any logistics support should you decide to attend. Roads should be fully cleared by then, but winter conditions remain unpredictable this time of year. After ending the call, Michael found himself uncharacteristically restless, the cabin's familiar confines suddenly constraining rather than comforting. The strange dissatisfaction drove him outside despite the bitter cold, his booted feet crunching through the crusty snow as he conducted an unnecessary perimeter check in the gathering darkness. The exterior security lights illuminated his path with harsh clarity, casting long shadows across the pristine white landscape that stretched between his property and the distant tree line. No mountain lion appeared tonight, the surrounding wilderness empty of visible movement as most creatures remained sheltered from the punishing cold. Yet as Michael completed his circuit, he found himself automatically checking the snow for tracks, scanning the forest edge with tactical assessment patterns and mentally cataloguing potential approach vectors, the same security protocols he had employed when responsible for rangers' safety. The habits had formed with surprising speed during their brief time together, creating operational patterns that now continued despite the absence of their original purpose. Back inside, the restored silence of the cabin seemed to demand acknowledgement, its emptiness a presence rather than an absence. Michael had spent years cultivating this isolation, deliberately structuring his life to minimize contact with a world that no longer made sense without the clear mission parameters and unit cohesion of military service. The solitude had been a choice, a solution to the disorientation and disconnection that had followed his medical discharge and subsequent failed attempts to reintegrate into civilian society. Yet something had shifted during the brief disruption of his carefully constructed isolation. The operational partnership with Ranger, temporary and limited though it had been, had temporarily reconnected him to patterns of existence that predated his withdrawal, reminding him of capabilities and purposes long suppressed beneath layers of protective distance. Mission parameters have changed, he found himself saying aloud to the empty cabin, the operational assessment emerging from professional habits deeper than his years of isolation. Adjustments to deployment strategy may be required. The statement hung in the silent room, simultaneously absurd and profound, a recognition that something within his carefully controlled existence had been irrevocably altered by the brief intrusion of connection, purpose, and responsibility for another's welfare. That night, Michael found sleep unusually elusive, despite his physical fatigue. The cabin's familiar sounds seemed somehow wrong. The regular clicks of the heating system, the occasional settling of logs in the wood stove, the faint electronic hum of security systems, all registering as incomplete, without the subtle counterpoint of another's breathing. The following morning brought clear skies and marginally warmer temperatures, the brutal storm system finally moving eastward as forecast. Michael forced himself back into his established routines, completing maintenance tasks with mechanical precision while deliberately suppressing the running commentary that had become habitual during Ranger's presence. When the satellite phone rang shortly before noon, he answered with his customary brevity, expecting another update from Sheriff Hollister. Instead, a different voice responded, female, professionally authoritative, and instantly recognizable despite their limited previous interaction. Mr. Donovan, this is Major Reynolds, Colorado Tactical K-9 Division. I'm calling with an update on Ranger's condition and to discuss a matter of potential interest. Michael acknowledged her identity with military courtesy, automatically shifting to the more formal communication patterns appropriate for interaction with a superior officer despite his civilian status. Major Reynolds seemed to note this adjustment, her own tone reflecting professional recognition of shared operational background. Ranger's recovery is proceeding efficiently, she reported, Medical assessment indicates all treatment protocols you implemented were optimally effective. Our veterinary specialists have noted that his condition significantly exceeds expected parameters, given the severity of his injuries and environmental exposure. He's exceptionally resilient, Michael responded. The assessment based on his direct observation, rather than emotional attachment, maintains functionality well beyond standard tolerance thresholds. Indeed, Reynolds agreed, that operational resilience is precisely what I wished to discuss with you. Our after-action analysis of the rescue incident has identified several significant factors that merit further consideration. The formal phrasing immediately triggered Michael's tactical awareness, recognizing that this conversation had a specific purpose beyond simple medical updates. Reynolds continued with the direct approach typical of Special Operations Command personnel. Captain Winters has provided a comprehensive incident report that highlights Rangers' selection process when seeking emergency assistance during critical conditions. Her assessment, confirmed by our behavioral analysis team, indicates that Rangers' approach to your vehicle at Miller's gas station was not random, but deliberately targeted. Michael had suspected as much from his own observations of the dog's behavior, but hearing it confirmed by professional analysis added another dimension to their brief interaction. Targeted based on what criteria? He asked, professional curiosity overriding his usual reticence. That's what makes this particularly interesting, Reynolds replied. According to our analysis, Ranger bypassed 3 other individuals at or near the gas station, including a uniformed security officer who would conventionally represent a more obvious assistance resource. He specifically identified you as an optimal temporary handler despite having no prior contact or scent familiarity. The implications of this assessment hung in the silence between them, the remarkable ability of the tactical dog to identify compatible operational capabilities across species barriers, recognizing in Michael something essential that transcended obvious external indicators. These tactical canines undergo specialized training in handler selection during emergency protocols, Reynolds explained. They're conditioned to identify specific behavioral and physiological markers, indicating individuals with tactical training, stress management capabilities, and decision-making patterns compatible with emergency operations. Essentially, they're trained to recognize operators even in civilian contexts. The recognition that Ranger had specifically selected him based on detected operational capabilities rather than convenience or random chance created an unexpected resonance in Michael, the sense of being truly seen by another being after years of deliberate invisibility. The dog had identified something essential in him that remained intact beneath layers of isolation and withdrawal. Some core operational identity that continued to exist despite his retreat from active service. There's more, Reynolds continued, after allowing a moment for this information to register. Captain Winters has submitted a formal request related to Ranger's ongoing care during her extended recovery period. Michael waited, sensing the conversation's true purpose approaching. Her rehabilitation timeline indicates at least 6 weeks before she can resume full handling duties, Reynolds explained. Standard protocol would assign Ranger to another handler within our unit during this period, but Captain Winters has specifically requested an alternative arrangement. She has formally recommended you as Ranger's temporary handler during her recovery process. The proposal landed with unexpected impact, disrupting Michael's careful equilibrium more effectively than any conventional suggestion could have. After years of meticulously maintaining separation from commitments, responsibilities, and connections, he was being offered temporary guardianship of an elite tactical asset, a role that would necessarily reconnect him to operational systems, professional networks, and purposeful engagement he had deliberately abandoned. That's not, he began automatically. the reflexive rejection forming before conscious consideration could intervene. I'm not qualified for that assignment. Interestingly, our assessment indicates otherwise, Reynolds countered smoothly. Your military background, demonstrated emergency response capabilities, and Ranger's own selection behavior suggest optimal compatibility for temporary reassignment. Additionally, your isolated location offers superior environmental conditions for his recovery phase compared to our facility's necessarily communal arrangements. When Michael remained silent, processing this unexpected development, Reynolds continued with the direct approach characteristic of Special Operations Command. Captain Winters believes you understand something essential about tactical partnership that makes you uniquely qualified for this temporary assignment. A formal assessment describes your interaction with Ranger as intuitive operational synchronization, rarely observed outside established handler relationships. The temporary assignment became permanent as Michael found purpose again through Ranger. Their partnership expanded to wilderness rescue operations, where Michael's military expertise paired perfectly with Ranger's extraordinary abilities. When Alex recovered, she recognized what had healed in both man and dog. Instead of reclaiming Ranger, she invited Michael to join their elite K9 unit. The frozen German shepherd who once begged a stranger for help had found not just a temporary handler, but restored a warrior's soul. This incredible story reminds us that sometimes help comes in unexpected forms, healing wounds we didn't know needed healing. If this story touched your heart, subscribe for more inspiring tales of courage and connection. There's more, Reynolds continued, after allowing a moment for this information to register. Captain Winters has submitted a formal request related to Ranger's ongoing care during her extended recovery period. Michael waited, sensing the conversation's true purpose approaching. Her rehabilitation timeline indicates at least 6 weeks before she can resume full handling duties, Reynolds explained. Standard protocol would assign Ranger to another handler within our unit during this period, but Captain Winters has specifically requested an alternative arrangement. She has formally recommended you as Ranger's temporary handler during her recovery process. The proposal landed with unexpected impact, disrupting Michael's careful equilibrium more effectively than any conventional suggestion could have. After years of meticulously maintaining separation from commitments, responsibilities, and connections, he was being offered temporary guardianship of an elite tactical asset, a role that would necessarily reconnect him to operational systems, professional networks, and purposeful engagement he had deliberately abandoned. That's not, he began automatically, the reflexive rejection forming before conscious consideration could intervene. I'm not qualified for that assignment. Interestingly, our assessment indicates otherwise, Reynolds countered smoothly. Your military background, demonstrated emergency response capabilities, and Ranger's own selection behavior suggest optimal compatibility for temporary reassignment. Additionally, your isolated location offers superior environmental conditions for his recovery phase compared to our facility's necessarily communal arrangements. When Michael remained silent, processing this unexpected development, Reynolds continued with the direct approach characteristic of Special Operations Command. Captain Winters believes you understand something essential about tactical partnership that makes you uniquely qualified for this temporary assignment. A formal assessment describes your interaction with Ranger as intuitive operational synchronization, rarely observed outside established handler relationships. The temporary assignment became permanent as Michael found purpose again through Ranger. Their partnership expanded to wilderness rescue operations, where Michael's military expertise paired perfectly with Ranger's extraordinary abilities. When Alex recovered, she recognized what had healed in both man and dog. Instead of reclaiming Ranger, she invited Michael to join their elite K9 unit. The frozen German shepherd who once begged a stranger for help had found not just a temporary handler, but restored a warrior's soul. This incredible story reminds us that sometimes help comes in unexpected forms, healing wounds we didn't know needed healing. If this story touched your heart, subscribe for more inspiring tales of courage and connection.